So we've all heard the famous expression, it's not the camera, it's the photographer. But how true is this? Today I want to do a little experiment to find out, and once and for all answer the question, is it the camera gear, is it the photographer, which one is it? So this is the $6,000 Leica Q2, and this is the $2,200 Fujifilm X Pro 3. It's close to $3,000 with this 28mm lens. And I have a lot of experience with both of these cameras. They're the main two pieces of gear I use for social media content creation. Now, according to this argument, technically both of these cameras should be the exact same if I'm using them. Now, initially, I can already kind of debunk this theory a little bit because cameras are extremely nuanced. There's a bunch of different variables that go into the choice of which camera I'm going to use. And if you don't know who I am, my name is Evan Rampt. I'm the founder of ModernCreativeMoney.com, and this YouTube channel is for photographers and creatives looking to explore ideas, make money with their camera, and live a better creative life. So if that sounds like you, go ahead, hit the subscribe button down below. But when I look at this topic of is it the camera, is it the photographer, I can't help but think of all the different variables that come into play when a photographer wants a certain result from a camera. For example, let's say I think about the variable convenience. Both the Fujifilm and the Leica pass what I call the hoodie test. I can fit them both in the front pocket of a hoodie and it's fine. But if I'm wearing skinny jeans like a hipster, the Fujifilm X Pro 3 kind of passes that test and the Leica fails miserably. So if I'm going for convenience, I'm probably going to pick up the X Pro 3. This same concept applies to when I go out on runs or I want to put one of these cameras into my daily travel bag. The Leica, it fits, but it's a little bit tight. The Fujifilm is extremely convenient. I can take it out on runs, I can take photos of my watch, and there's no real issue in terms of inconvenience. So in this example, the camera is kind of important regardless of my skill as a photographer. Another variable to consider is something like speed. Let's say you want to share images quickly to social media and keep a high quality, you're probably going to use the camera that has the best app. In this video, I couldn't even get the Fujifilm app to open, so I would go with the Leica app, which loaded up quickly. I can transfer the photos quickly to my iPhone, throw a quick edit on them, and share them to my Instagram story, and there's no real issue there. So once again, I'm selecting a camera based on what it's capable of, and it has nothing to do with my skills per se. One final example to illuminate this point, let's say the variable of versatility presents itself. Obviously, the Leica has a fixed 28mm lens, but this Fujifilm X Pro 3 has an interchangeable lens system. So if I want to shoot, let's say, at 100mm, I'm going to pick up this camera and put a 100mm lens on it, whereas I can't do that with the Leica Q2. Now, when you consider all these variables, it's pretty obvious the camera is an important part of the creative process because it's a tool after all. You can't just ignore what certain tools do well and what certain tools don't do as well. But I understand that this argument of the camera versus the photographer is usually presented in a context of skill. People like to think that any photographer with a little bit of skill can achieve a good result regardless of the camera they're using. So I'm going to play ball with y'all today and I'm going to test this, and the first way I'm going to test it is by putting both of these cameras in a controlled environment. So we're going to set up the exact same photo in my studio using both cameras, and my friends at LumeCube sent me their Tube Light XL and their Tube Light Mini to help with this example. I've been using their products for years, so having LumeCube sponsor today's video was a no-brainer. These lights are my favorite light tubes I've ever used, hands down. They're an easy way to add more character to your photos as well as your video, and they come in easy to carry travel cases to keep your accessories organized, and they come with tripod legs to allow you to set up these lights anywhere easily, which is a feature that I love because I move my lights around my office quite a bit. There's 16 million different color options with these lights, green and magenta tint controls, they double as a power bank using their USB-C port, and they have an app that helps you control the lights via your smartphone, and they have a feature called Color Picker with the app where you can select a specific color and have the lights match to them. This is epic and is something that sets LumeCube apart. So if you're interested in these lights, they just came out. You can head to the link in the description down below, check them out for yourselves and get more information. So shout out to LumeCube for sponsoring today's video. Now, as for our example, both cameras on our tripod, like I already mentioned, both shoot at 28mm. They're both at the same aperture and they're both using a 1/4 Pro Mist filter, and the results really surprised me here. They're virtually identical. It's hard to distinguish which is which. Personally, I enjoyed the Fujifilm image more straight out of camera. I just think it looks a little more natural with the colors, and I really enjoyed that image. So there is some truth to the fact that in a controlled environment, if you know what you're doing with your camera, you should be able to get a good result regardless of the tools you have at your disposal. But once you take cameras out of this controlled environment, what ends up happening? And I'm going to give you a little bit of a spoiler. The flaws in this mindset of it's just the photographer begin to present themselves. So as I went out to test this idea even more, I noticed something very interesting. For some of the photos, the camera I was using did not matter whatsoever. And these were the photos that were predicated on my skill and knowledge as a photographer. The images of me walking down the bridge, the images of a leaf, these images looked great regardless of what camera they were made with, because I was relying on my abilities as a photographer to properly expose and compose the image. But as I ventured into photos that had more variables that maxed out the capacity of the tools that I was using, these two cameras, I noticed there were limitations to what I was able to do. The best example of this is the portrait images that utilize depth of field. Because the Fujifilm X Pro 3 is a APS-C camera sensor, I was only able to achieve so much bokeh on these photos. But with the full frame Q2, I was able to achieve much more depth of field and much more bokeh in these portraits and separate myself from the background more. Regardless of my photography skills, I was unable to overcome the limitations of the Fujifilm X Pro 3 and give myself more bokeh on my photos. I was relying on the camera and the tool that I had in that moment. And this was a really interesting moment for me because it answered the question that I asked at the beginning of the video. Is it the camera or is it the photographer? And the answer is a combination of both. You see, cameras essentially are tools, and every tool has a capacity limit. It can only do so much. Essentially, the gear you're using is a resource for you to maximize the skill level that you have. Telling someone that camera gear doesn't matter at all is probably the biggest lie in photography. The tool you're using is a part of the process, and there's nothing wrong with embracing that. But on the other side of the coin, the photographer is obviously important as well. That's why this concept ends up being kind of half true. The photographer matters and the camera matters. Think about this as an example. Let's say you're a great photographer and normally you shoot on a Sony full frame camera, but one day you go somewhere where no cameras are allowed and you can only bring your iPhone. You have the skills necessary to create a good image on your iPhone, but in the back of your mind, you know that if you had your normal full frame camera, you would create a better result. You can create a better result with better tools, and that is completely fine. There's nothing wrong with embracing that. Photography is a combination of the skills that you have and the tools that you are using. My favorite photographer, Alex Webb, has talked about how his favorite film stock was Kodachrome. Kodachrome was simply a tool that he utilized to bring his creative vision and potential to its absolute maximum. That was the film stock that he liked, that helped him create the best result, so it was simply a tool for him. I think a statement that is more true than it's not the camera, it's the photographer is the phrase, a better camera won't make you a better photographer. And I think these phrases have kind of become interchangeable with one another. If you don't have the skills necessary to utilize all the potential of a piece of camera gear that you're buying, obviously that gear will not make you better. But if your skills are higher than the piece of gear that you're using, you are essentially holding yourself back. And that is where the delicate balance between skill and the tools you're using comes into play. And after this little experiment, I think it's very clear that it's not about one or the other. It's about finding what works for you and being okay with that, and not looking down on other people who are trying to find what works well for them. At the end of the day, this is creativity, and all we're trying to do is express ourselves the best way that we know how. This was a fun thought experiment for me. It was something I just wanted to explore, and it gave me a lot of clarity on this topic of why we buy camera gear, what's the importance of it, and where it fits into this whole technology, art mixture, photography world that we live in right now, especially with YouTube and the internet. So if you enjoyed today's video, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe if you are not yet, and remember, my course is live on moderncreativemoney.com. If you're looking to answer the question of how do you make money with your creativity, I break it all down with my 3-pillar system. This is a system that I use to grow my creative business to one that makes money 3 different ways, and it's a long-term actionable approach to help you grow your business, and I take the trial and error out of you growing inside of each one of these creative pillars with all the foundational information you need and the path to implement it. You also get the Modern Creative Money Workbook, which are tools that you can use in conjunction with the course and well into your creative career. Things like pitch email templates, contract examples, licensing agreement examples, the perfect offer worksheet, things like my content map that I use to map out all my social media content, the tool that I use to tell stories with my content, and things like invoice template and invoice example. There is so much value in this workbook. If you want to check out more, you can go to the link in the description down below to sign up, and enrollment ends on June 1st for the one-on-one coaching help. So if you want to enroll in the course and work with me one-on-one, you can do that, but you only have until June 1st. Check it all out at moderncreativemoney.com. Thank you all for watching today's video. I'll see you in the next one.